Well, what's up, Colliders? Welcome back to the Collision Live. Daniel here, joined at the desk, as always, by the Fast and My Furious, Mr. Samuel David Kemp.
Well, I'd rather be fast.
Yeah, well, and I'd rather be furious. So we're off to a good start here. But so you're a wild man. How are you feeling lately?
Yeah. Speaking of being fast.
Yeah, speaking of fast and furious.
Yeah, so I completed my first 100-mile bike ride over the weekend.
Yeah, was it your first and last?
First and last, probably. Although there's something just really nice about having that accomplished. I'm glad it happened. I'm glad it's over. But it was the Georgia 400 Century in Atlanta, and so it rained for half of it. And so that was my first bicycle in the rain as well.
Yeah, so Sam's feeling a little bit like a warrior these days, a little bit like a Viking. But and we'll actually be talking about sports and pushing yourself to the limit later on in this episode. But I want to thank you guys for joining us. Some of you guys that have been joining us every week, or if this is your first time, Cousin Live, we just talk about pop culture, what's going on, questions, and how as Christians we can engage in dialogue and contribute to and just navigate this jungle of pop culture. There always seems to be stuff going on.
Indeed, there is.
In culture. So we have a couple of things we'll be talking about. Like I said, we'll get into kind of just the role of professional sports and what is sort of that cultural role. Is there anything Christians can learn from or contribute to? But before we get into that, I thought we'd talk about sex. This is the Collision Live After Dark, adults only version. Just kidding. But this is, again, sex and culture and Hollywood, and they've always gone together. There's always been a component since the very beginning. A lot of the kind of the traditional stigma of kind of the church against Hollywood, against culture, really boils down to just the sexual, content and explicit and kind of what they're pushing. So I thought this is based on, I wrote an article that's dropping this week about this, but really based on the Luca, the latest Pixar movie that just came out. This is a conversation that me and Sam kind of had off camera when this movie was coming out. Again, it's a good movie. We have a review on our channel, YouTube, and website for Luca. This is a story about friendship. Kind of the director says pre-romantic innocence of childhood, based on his own growing up with his own best friend and their experiences. So the culture, like the culture does, heard that, said, no, thank you. We're going to make this all about sex. And again, a lot of I would say most of the conversation about this movie kind of following that is making it about sex, making it about sort of this gay allegory. Here's some of the headlines I pulled for my article that I thought this sort of testifies to this. But Screen Rant says, why Luca is a gay story despite what Pixar says. Or BuzzFeed, I'm sorry, but Luca is totally a gay movie. Vanity Fair, is Luca Pixar's first gay movie? Maybe. Pixar says Luca isn't gay, but the movie speaks for itself. And Slate just asks, as their headline, how gay is Pixar's Luca? And it's interesting. I could have pulled, there's a lot more articles that kind of follow a similar trend as far as this kind of forcing this movie to be an allegory or symbolic of sex. These two male characters. I think it's sort of the latest kind of symptom of sort of this deeper issue that our culture has of just sort of sexualizing everything. So what do you see this culture, you see Luca, you see people approaching not just Luca, but just culture and kind of making everything about sex. I know Loki, the new Marvel show, he came out as sort of queer or whatever he identifies as. So that's sort of been the headlines of this in the last week, not even more than kind of what's going on in the show. But so everything's about sex. So what do you?
Yeah, well, I mean, I feel like it's sort of maybe Hollywood and culture doing what Hollywood and culture does, which is they want to interpret everything through the lens of sex. And it's not just necessarily like with Luca. It's obviously not a sexual, movie about kids, obviously, and thankfully. But it's making everything sort of through this prism of sexual identity as well. And it's just everything has to be about sex or viewed through the lens of sexual identity. And it can't just be like two young boys having a fun summer together. It has to be sort of crammed into this worldview and shown as some you know masterpiece of gay propaganda or something that it not necessarily is. And I think you know, sexualizing kids unfortunately is nothing new. And we both recently read a book called The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self, and Carl Trueman, he goes in a lot about how this has been happening for a very long time with a lot of, you know, folks in the arts and a lot of philosophers, just how there's this obsession, I think, for some to if they come to a place in their life, let's say they are gay, and so they look back and they feel like they have to like project all of their sexual identity on kids for some reason, and like just make everything about sex even when it's not. And I think that's really sort of the turn that has been happening recently in Hollywood. Not so much just like we know Hollywood is all about sex, but now it's sort of like now you have to be sort of you know, a gay kid. It can't just be a kid in a movie or whatever. Like,
Yeah,
so they're just sort of forcing this down further and further and further.
Yeah, kind of going away from the because I think there's a couple kind of maybe nuances or you know, ways to like for me the you know again I have no problem if someone wants to watch Luca and they interpret it as a gay allegory. You know, as Christians we do that all the time. We you know in our review I did that with to a certain degree with Ray and the Last Dragon, where it's, you know, this movie wasn't intended to be a Christian allegory, but I think there's some symbolism, and as a Christian, I can kind of understand and see things. So that again, you can interpret movies however you want.
Yeah, I mean and that's part of the. I mean that's part of art too. I mean like The Matrix has been sort of synonymous with like red pilling and sort of that whole political, I guess, political thing that has been hung on to The Matrix, and that was not ever the intention of The Matrix.
Yeah, so that kind of on its own is fine. You know, I have no problem if someone, you know, I don't. That's not how I saw it. That's not how the director intended it. But if that's how you interpret it, then that's just sort of what you get from it. The kind of the more eye-opening thing for me is not just that, you know, there are some people in the gay community wants to see in this kind of like they did with Frozen and the Let It Go, kind of, you know, attribute some kind of maybe gay allegory to it. It's just how the whole conversation about this movie, it wasn't just like, you know, a couple people. It was the whole conversation, all the reviews, it's like, no, this is, and this is, it must be, because why would it be about just friendship if they're two male characters? So this idea that
there's no such thing as male friendship anymore. Don't you?
Get out of here.
Don't you know that?
You know, so for me, it's more that, and I think there is a distinction. We'd be hypocrites if we, you know, so you can never interpret it as anything other than what the director intended, because Christians do the opposite all the time. But it's just, I think it just reflects in our culture that the question, almost the only question that seems to matter is sex. Like what, you know, this movie, if it can't just be about friendship, it has to be in some way sexual, or someone like Loki, you know, these kind of nuanced, interesting characters, these superheroes. It's like, you know, all that's fine, but what do they think about sex? Like, who are they attracted to? Who are they sleeping with? And sort of these questions that I think didn't used to matter, shouldn't matter. Yeah. I think that's sort of like you were saying, like, the church has always had to fight back against sort of the pressuring into like glorifying physical sex and like the act of sex. But I think now it's more the lens of sex. Like it's not necessarily that this movie is pushing kids to go have sex themselves, but it's pushing this ideology that, you know, really everything, including just your entire identity, all your relationships, has to be seen through this lens of sex.
Yeah, and I think that's the I think the newer sort of shift is sort of that lens of like sexual identity and making that more and more priority, and like that's one thing, but then I think to sort of put that on to kids, I think is really where that's reaching some new ground. And it's like, okay, yeah, that's definitely not okay to just sort of start forcing things onto children that really, you know, children have no business or even really concept of what that is. Like they're not even like sexually active before puberty. So it's like, so why the obsession with like, you know, making an 11-year-old into like this drag queen, you know, whatever. and I think that to me is where the real danger lies, is sort of, you've got some issues in adulthood, and so now you're looking back and saying, oh, I see myself in this young kid, and so obviously it must be, the same way that I felt when I was that kid's age, and or whatever. And so I think you see a lot of this sort of adults kind of putting their issues onto kids, and I think in some way it's just doing so to sort of justify, you know, their position, or how they feel or how they are, rather than just like, no, like people might be different than you. And like when did that stop being okay, that like people are just different, not like everybody has to be,
because you see
one
that,
way or the other.
again, we're at the very tail end of Pride Month, and you see it sort of the sexualization of kids. You see it a lot in Pride Month, where it's,
Yeah.
like we talked about a couple episodes ago, like Blue's Clues and all these kind of cartoons and Rugrats and some of these shows that are, the conversation is becoming all about sex, and if the mother's a lesbian, or Blue's Clues has their Pride Parade, and some of that. And I think there is the element as Christians to to resist and to have conversations about just like the type of sexuality that's being pushed, and walking through those issues. But almost at a deeper level, for me, what's troubling is just that these shows are talking about sexuality and sex at all.
Yeah.
And regardless
Yeah.
of whether it's this LGBTQ stuff or real traditional, and it's just these kids are like 5.
Yeah.
You're introducing this sort of this lens of what matters and how you view the world, and your parents and everything is sort of almost reduced to just sex. Like
Yeah.
I think that, as and I get into it in the article that we just posted, maybe kind of in more detail, but almost that, we've been pretty, as the church, we've fought against this, the pressure on young people to have sex and some of that, but to also make sure that we're not like affirming or kind of pushing along the ideology that it's all about sex, like just the base level.
Yeah. And I think that's I think really the deeper issue in all this is making everything reducible to sex. And it's like, okay, well, no, actually there's more to life, and like there are other things going on rather than just like your sex and your sexual identity and like all these other things. And especially for kids, it's like there's no concept of that for kids, and it's like, so now you're sort of forcing this on them and saying, no, this is really what your life needs to be about, and this is what's important, when in fact it shouldn't be.
Yeah, and I think, and then we'll move on to the next topic. I mean, we'd love to hear what you guys think, as you, maybe if you're a parent, or just as you've navigated through some of these issues. But I think some of the ways that maybe the church has approached it wrong in a way is to kind of to resist sort of the sexualization and this sexual agenda gospel of Hollywood, but by sort of like the way to resist it is to place your identity in like a biblical Christian sexual ethic, which again we should be pushing a Christian sexual ethic, but I think in a way we're almost affirming that it's all about, even to God it's about sex. Sexual abstinence, virginity is like the defining trait of the a Christian, or we're the traditional heterosexual sexuality that's the identity of the Christian. And I think the church, we need to be better at going, those are important, that's part of God's design, but our identity is not in our sexuality at all.
Right.
That's just a byproduct, but our identity is in Christ. So I encourage you guys, check out the article that we just posted. Yeah. I get into that a little more, and we love to hear what you guys think of that. Thoughts on sex? There should be lots. But so the next thing is we can jump right into pop culture news. So not a whole lot of kind of crazy big things going on in pop culture, but a couple of things that just sort of stood out to me as I was checking on the internet, seeing what was going on. Yep. The banjo player Winston Marshall from Mumford & Sons left. I can't remember if we talked about some of the initial
I don't know
drama.
I think we did. I feel like we did. I know you and I talked about it. Whether or not it was on this show, I can't remember now, but I think it was, or at least in passing.
Yeah, and again, I haven't read. He had. I encourage you to maybe check out his statement for it. But he had the gall to read a book that wasn't socially approved by everyone, and I do respect that he sort of did the apology thing. He apologized for it, and he really didn't have to drop out. He could just culture moved on, forgot. He could have just jumped right back into it, and basically said, you know what, I'm not going to censure myself or we're going to bow down to that. I'm going to graciously just I'll leave, kind of leave the drama.
Yeah.
So in a way, it's kind of a cancel culture thing, but I think it even goes deeper than that. I saw Chris Pratt, the movie Tomorrow War on Amazon. It comes out next week. We'll probably have a review for that because I love aliens, and it's a movie about aliens, and I love Chris Pratt. So
and time travel. So
and time travel, all the things that I like. But I saw he had an interview just sort of asking people to turn off their phones while they watch it, and I thought it was an interesting sort of sheds light on that dynamic of when we're watching so much more like streaming and at home, just what is lost when we're so distracted. And he's sort of saying, give yourself to the movie like you would in a movie theater. The Britney Spears stuff is probably too complicated to get real into, but she continues to, with all her sort of saga and stuff, is still very much playing out. Something that was just announced recently, and the cover was just announced, the Christmas Pig, the new J.K. Rowling story. We've talked about her a bunch on this show. I know she's a controversial figure, really for everyone these days.
Yeah.
Used to just be for Christians. Now she's controversial on all sides. But
meanwhile, she keeps cashing those checks.
Cashing out checks, writing. And I'm curious about this story. I love Christmas. I don't love.
Oh yeah.
So we'll be doing a
love
review.
Christmas and love bacon. So
yeah, all the good stuff. That comes out I think in October. And then the last thing, the Clifford and the Big Red Dog trailer came out. I know it's a movie that Sam is excited about. This thing looks awful. I don't know if you saw the trailer.
I did not, and now I don't think I will.
Because it's like I grew up reading Clifford. He doesn't look like. It reminds me of like the first Sonic trailer. I don't know if you remember that whole.
Yeah.
It was like, that doesn't look anything like the. It's basically just a big dog that they blew up and like edited and colored him red. Like I think he's like CGI, so I guess they just did it that way. But he doesn't look at all like Clifford. He's just this big red dog, and
just stand in.
It is not good. So I'll probably be taking my kids to see that. So pray for me for that. So the next thing that we thought, this is something that Sam had an idea for. There's a ton going on in sports right now.
Yes.
Wimbledon is on, which I love tennis. I've been following. I think this is the first day of Wimbledon. Already some big upsets. The Tour de France. Sam's
happening.
Just a few steps away.
Yeah. I mean, I'm practically probably next year I'll be on the tour. Yeah. No. That's underway. I think stage 3 just wrapped.
And the Olympics are coming up. We have a double dose because I think the Winter Olympics is next year.
I know, like how exciting to have back-to-back Olympic years.
Back-to-back. I start every Olympics by being, I'll just tune in to some of the big events, and by the end I have like 4 different screens and monitors, and I'm following everything, and I'm staying up late to check the water polo, and I just get obsessed every single time.
But what are the curling results?
Yeah, it's a problem. I'm thankful that it only goes on for 2 weeks.
And it's only once every 2 years, so
so you can recover from that. But I thought we'd just talk about that. Sports is sort of one of those things that it is pop culture, but it's not pop culture. Like it's not what you kind of traditional, at least here at the Collision or me, we think of it as like movies and music and the arts. Sports isn't really the arts, but it very much overlaps with pop culture. A lot of things that happen, sports figures, and like Michael Jordan was very much or LeBron, like Tiger Woods. These are pop culture figures. So it does overlap.
Lance Armstrong? No, too soon.
Crickets. So we thought we'd just talk about what is the role of sports. Just as people, as Christians, as society. It's become kind of more of a heated area in recent years with some of the politics. So what do you think? What is sports? Is it good for society? Is sports?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think it's good for society. I think it is traditionally one of those areas of sort of escape that people can kind of go and live in for a few hours, maybe once a week or whatever. I think especially for the traditional sports teams, like you think football or baseball here in the U.S., and then soccer for the more international folks. And even though that's becoming bigger and bigger here in the U.S. as well, so I think it can provide like a really nice escape to just sort of you come out of your normal life, your routine, and you get to watch people perform at their peak. And I think there's something really exciting about that. And it's like live. It's real. So there's this element that I think as a spectator you're a part of what's happening. Maybe more so than definitely more so than like a movie or a TV show that you're just watching at home by yourself or with friends. And maybe like live theater is sort of close to this as well. But there's something where I think people identify with their team. Like, so if they have a team or if they have an athlete that they really love, there's something that sort of draws you in and makes you feel more part of it because you're cheering on that individual or that team. That you don't really do that in art, I don't think. Like, there's just this different thing at play that I think is really needed, and it's sort of a release for society as well to
It's like
sort
a
of.
unifier, because I think you saw.
It is, yeah.
We were talking about on when COVID, this shut down sports, and you sort of see what life is like without professional sports. Like when there was no, I'd still kind of routinely just out of habit, like when I get on my computer and pull up ESPN to see the scores of the baseball or basketball, and there's nothing to check.
Yeah.
There's the sort of the stories that kind of come along with
Yeah.
the drama and stuff of sports and streaks and athletes, and you just when we lost that for however long sports were shut down
Yeah.
for COVID, you kind of realize I remember I think I might have done a tweet or talked to or something about it when it sort of like you saw just how much, maybe more than ever, we needed sports was the time when it was, with COVID and stuff. Just sort of that unifier, that common ground of. I know, I've gone to a bunch of baseball games and hockey games, and your team scores, and you're like high fiving strangers and hugging strangers.
Yeah,
and
just the eruption of the crowd, when amazing things happen, and I don't know. There's something that you really can't get that anywhere else than like a live sporting event that's exciting. And so I think that's the sort of the unique place of sports. And I think especially even just like as the Olympics are coming up, like to me, that's always been sort of the pinnacle of athletic achievement. And you see these folks, you get to kind of see their stories, and it's very human, and you get to see the sort of discipline and the pain and the dedication that goes into just sort of your few seconds of performance. And I think maybe the overlap with the arts is it is performance based. And so I think, good art is a great performance, from whether it's, I think especially maybe live theaters, maybe, or live music would be the other sort of close crossover, that like these are people who are performing at like the very best of their ability, and I think there's just something very engrossing in that, and I think it can be helpful to just sort of come outside and just see what's possible for people to do. And so I think that's one of the beautiful things, and I think sort of that's the highest ideal maybe of sports.
And I think there's a reason that the Bible uses, especially Paul uses sports metaphors, analogy, run, the race to win the prize, using very much sort of this like Olympic imagery, because there's something about that is inspiring, just to these people that are that dedicated to what they do, and to kind of rise above the pressure. Like there's so many like life lessons that even if the athlete themselves, and it's not like a direct Christian, doesn't have to be a Christian or anything of it.
Right.
This thing about that, seeing these people kind of push themselves and discipline themselves, and that I think as Christians, that's why Paul's saying, the Christian life is like this, just as these people are. And I think, as the, like the Olympics stuff, whenever I get addicted to that, it always pushes me to be more disciplined with like my own exercise and running. But I think even wider, it just pushes me to be more intentional about, my training my mind, disciplining my, so I definitely think there's value in that. And maybe the one side of that, I think maybe has even pulled sports more into like the pop culture circle lately, is this sort of all the politics. I know it seems more often, at least to me, it seems like it's more than it has been in the past, very much sort of the political side, or just sort of ideologies and all that is sort of taking front and center. And I don't know, what do we do? Because I'll be honest, I'm in some ways, I sort of the whole like, just stick to sports. We don't, I think as Christians, we can be somewhat hypocritical with that.
Yeah.
No one was telling Tim Tebow to stick to sports. You don't need a Bible verse. You don't need to be doing anti-abortion Super Bowl ads. Like we all celebrated. He's using his platform. God gave him that platform, and so we in some ways we're inconsistent with that. What we usually mean is just stick to sports unless you're
for my cause,
from my side.
Yeah.
Then it's a platform, and you should speak out, and we need to pray for people to use it. So I'm not. Again, I think athletes are human. They have the right to speak out about other issues. We speak out about sports. We're not professional athletes. So some of that I think is somewhat self-serving, but it is becoming more and more almost an issue where it's just sort of that common ground that sports used to be is becoming a little bit more divisive than it.
Yeah, and I think that's maybe that's sort of the rub with it is like, yeah, I think individuals should be able to sort of use their platform, do whatever they want to. But I also think realizing that it does, I think in many ways distract from why people come to sports and support sports and love to see their team play and their athletes play is because of the sport, and it's not because this person, is a Christian or this person is gay or whatever. And so I think there is an element, I think, of distraction that I feel like is kind of creeping in now, that because it seems like it's become more and more of a thing to like, well, if you're a pro athlete, then you really should be sort of championing your cause at every opportunity. And yeah, you should speak about the things that matter to you, but I guess maybe the how and the when do you do that, and can you do it in a way that's not like, now you're that guy on that team and like everything has to be about you now and not the team. And so I don't know, like I think there is a danger in making it too much about that and less about the more positive things about sports, whether it's like teamwork and overcoming adversity and all these other things. And so I don't know, I think sometimes people can get tired of that, but like you said, I think there's definitely we like to be against it until somebody is speaking up for what we believe, and it's like, oh well, I mean, that's different.
And I think part of the problem is even less like the athletes and more like the ESPNs, right? Because most of these media, sports media they are coming at it from a very specific side, and it's the same side on every issue. It's not like a nuance. Sports is the place where we have these discussions. Like, I think it's because it's very media driven. Like, it's become more like, hey, we're just going to use this to slam this ideology down your throat, and it's not a dialogue. It's just hey, you want to see LeBron James dunk the basketball? Before you do, we're gonna push this. And so I don't know.
Yeah.
I think in some ways sports will always be political, just because everything is sort of somewhat political.
And it has been. I mean, and it has obviously, like, there's been times in history where it has broken ground.
In very positive
ways.
Yeah,
in very good ways, and it's paved the way for great things to happen in our society. But yeah, I mean, I think there's always going to be that tension,
And I would kind of say, I think movies and that side of the entertainment is very much like a lens into like the ideologies and like more the philosophies of the world. And I think sports is more like a reflection of like the social causes or like the just some of the movements and the trends. And I think I know some people are just sort of tired of hearing it all, but I think it is valuable as Christians just to sports is just a way to kind of see like a microcosm of so many of these issues on a bigger scale, just to I guess try and kind of understand what's going on in the culture, even if we just really want to watch our team beat the opponents soundly in the skirmish. But let us know. I know some of the like politics has ruined sports and all the ratings are down. Some of that is also a little tricky because like I think a lot of that is based on the changing of medium, like it's streaming and live television, like all that's down across the board, not just because of politics. I think sometimes that argument is a forced one. Like I think it has played a factor, but I don't think it's the reason. Like you kind of hear. But let us know. Are you tired of just all the kind of the stuff going on in sports that is distracting you? is it kind of taking away some of that common ground where now it is very much like you got to have your political bent, or is it still a place where you can kind of connect with people and kind of as Christians find that common ground to build relationships regardless of what worldview or political view you're coming at it from?
More importantly, are you as excited about the Olympics as we are?
Yeah, or the San Francisco Giants, who have the best record in baseball currently, and happens to be my team. So I'm excited about that. So this week at the Collision, a couple things going on. Like I already mentioned, we dropped a new article, kind of resisting Hollywood's sexual gospel. A lot of the stuff we were talking about here, but just sort of more nuanced, more in depth of how has not just recognizing what's going on in Hollywood with all the sexual stuff, but how do you resist it? How do you kind of push back? What are some ways as the church we can kind of present an alternative to that? So I encourage you guys to check that out on our website, thecollision.org. Luca review is still up there on our YouTube and on the website. Kind of looking into some of that, more than just the sexual aspect, but also just having that conversation. Is it something that Christians should be wary of, or is it a good movie that has some good life lessons and sea monsters?
Yeah.
So I encourage you to check that out. Anything else going on?
I'm ready for the Olympics. That's
when does that start? That's soon.
It's coming up. Yeah, July. I don't know the date.
Yeah, next month.
But I know like trials are happening now, and then I think in like 2 weeks, 3 weeks, I think. Pretty soon.
Yeah, so
we'll get back to you.
Looking forward to that. I'm sure we'll be talking about that on the show. But thanks, guys, for joining us again for the Collision Live. Especially if you guys have been following us for the last couple of weeks or however long we've been doing this crazy show. If you're watching us after we aired live, we encourage you still go ahead, throw some comments in, let us know your thoughts. We read all the comments and love to have a discussion on some of these issues.
Yeah.
So have a great week, guys. Thanks for watching, and continue to collide with your world for Christ.